Hello again and welcome back. And you see what I did? I did the hair thing before it came on, which I probably just ruined by telling you about. Hey, that's kind of our thing now, isn't it? So I'll give you a little laugh to start with. But today we're going to finish up our same stuff on market structures. We've got two more left, and one of them will finish up with something kind of cool because we're also going to cover game theory and the prisoner's dilemma today. And it's one of my favorites because as a little girl, I always loved puzzles. Yes, I was that kind of a geek on trips. So I know we used to travel with family members, and I remember my aunt bringing me she just bought me this huge, it's like that that thick box of not box, a book of puzzles, and I just loved it. Kept me um, entertained for hours on the road. And I think that, maybe they should have known what was coming for me then. Maybe she did. But because a lot of those puzzles were, especially the ones where you draw grid and you eliminate, so anyway, it was really fun. And so that's what kind of get to do a little bit of that today with the prisoner's dilemma. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. But meanwhile, let's get through, let's get started with some of our other stuff. Okay, so these other two right now, so now we're going to do the next market structure, which is monopolistic competition. And just as the name suggests, this one contains elements of both monopoly and perfect competition. So it contains elements of both, which is really, and it's kind of the cool elements of both. So it's like the kid in the family that got the best of both parents' traits. So really kind of neat. And I love it because this one deals with behavioral economics. So we get to talk a little bit about that today, and that is kind of a hobby of mine. Yes, I know I need better hobbies, but actually I don't because I enjoy that one. Okay, so the characteristics of monopolistic competition. It does have many buyers and sellers. So it has many buyers, many sellers. The products are substitutes, but differentiated. And that means, of course, that they are not viewed as identical by consumers. And then finally, the last one, there are no barriers to entry. All right, so we're seeing a lot more competition there than we are monopoly, right? So, but let's keep going and we'll get to what that means. All right, we'll get to where the monopoly part comes in. So each supplier has some influence over price, making them price makers, and have no supply curve. All right, and we'll see why in a minute, okay? Because that's the monopoly characteristics. We're going to see why they have no supply curve in just a short moment here. They also have downward sloping demand curves. So sellers behave competitively. So they have the downward sloping demand curves and they're going to behave competitively like that. All right, so let's see. What does it mean by differentiated products? What is that? Let's get to the monopoly part of things. This brings us into little thing called brand loyalty. There's where your monopoly comes from, okay? Brand loyalty is it. Because how many of you, and I know that if we're in a classroom and I could see you, every single one of you would raise your hands to this. How many of you have a certain product that's it for you? It doesn't matter how many other options are out there. That's the one you're going to buy. That and only that one. Most people are that way. Some of the most brand loyal people in the world, cigarette smokers are one. And if any of you are smokers or no smokers, you know what I'm talking about. Their brand is the only one they want. And another one are coffee drinkers. There are some who will try different kinds, but for the majority, people have their tastes and preferences for that. My husband, for example, he only wants Starbucks Pike Place Market. That is it. That's all he wants. He will drink some of my Newman's um, if he's forced to, if we're completely out of Pike Place, but they may as well have a monopoly as far as he's concerned. There is one product. That's where the monopoly thing. So according to certain consumers or groups of consumers, that product may as well be a monopoly. All right. They have a monopoly on their particular business, even though there's substitutes available out there. All right. So that's where the brand loyalty by. Reasons for brand loyalty. Maybe it's more pleasing to the eye. They prefer a certain appearance of one over the other. That kicks in the face a lot of store brands. And store brands fall under this category because there are a lot of competition, but there's a perceived difference, which brings in the brand loyalty. So it could be perceived to be lower quality. Okay. So physical appearance is one. That's what bites in the rear end a lot of your store brands. They just don't spend as much time on the physical appearance, their packaging and such, as the name brand competitors. All right. Availability is another one. If it's available, actually, here's something funny. If it's too available, then it is perceived as lower quality. That's something that Starbucks was debating about when, the old joke about Starbucks on every corner. If one's shut down or if one's too busy, you just drive a mile up the road and there's another one. You could even walk from the parking lot probably to get to one. And so there was a debate in Starbucks not too long ago said, are they getting too basic? And you can't see me, I'm doing air quotes right now. Nobody wants to be, there's no bigger enemy to bougie people than to be called basic. Nobody wants to be called that. And if it's too accessible, too available, then it becomes basic. It becomes, it's not hip anymore. And so that can also affect its image, the product's image and things like that. So availability can be a double-edged sword there as far as the brand loyalty. Sometimes it can work in your favor. For example, with little kids in McDonald's, seeing those golden arches would always, make them want that. But in the case of what we were talking about with Starbucks, if it's too available. Now, Michael Kors ran into that. If you've noticed, they've pulled their products out of stores like Macy's, and they're not and Belk. I think they're not as widely accessible. Now, it's been a minute since I've been into those because I've gotten so into online shopping. I never go out and shop in the store, but it had gotten too available, so they closed down a lot of their stores. Coach was another one that did that. Coach handbags had gotten too available, too accessible, and it took some of the mystique out. They were no longer a luxury brand anymore. They were just considered the same brand as something you would just buy. I mean, you could just walk out of your steps and buy some. So they shut down a lot of their stores, and that was something that I thought was a risk for them, because some people might assume if they're shutting down their stores that the company is doing poorly, and they did assume that. But now that the dust settled from that and people are used to it, it just makes them a more exclusive brand. So that's something to foster brand loyalty right there. Speaking of handbags, there's one handbag I am really desperate to buy one. And I've seen them around and I like them. And that's the Goyard, Goyard, those bags. So I go online and I'm looking just to see, because what I like to do, I like to see what something costs and then kind of decide, from there, and then start saving my money and figure out, if it's worth it, if I want it, that type of stuff. So I went online to try to look, and there's not a lot of prices out there. You had to find my prices from different sites. And the more I looked, the more I realized that they didn't, well, as the company put it, would engage in interstate commerce or internet commerce. So in other words, they're not going to send it to me. So I have to either go to a store that carries them, and there's none here in Atlanta. That would be New York. I could go to Barney's or somewhere like that up in New York, or go to Paris, which I am perfectly willing to do. So that's actually got my wheels in motion about that. So that's why those bags are exclusive, and somebody gets one, they're carrying it every dang day of the week because they've gone to trouble to get it. So anyway, that's a little bit about brand loyalty there. Another thing that could cause this, if there is an attached service, such as delivered pizza or gifts with purchase. So delivered pizza, a lot of people have a brand loyalty towards a certain pizza company, and it's because they can get it delivered. That's one thing. I remember when my daughters had friends over and we would be trying to order pizza, and I'd say, well, where do you want me to order it from? And everybody had a slight preference to something. Oh, just like another thing, I've noticed that people are either Dunkin' Donuts people or Starbucks people. There's really no middle ground there. And you may be saying, oh, no, I like them both. No, you really have a preference for one or the other. Now, you may be the exception. I'm not going to tell you your own mind. But the truth is, I've noticed that with people, they either have a preference for one or the other. And finally, the last is the image of the brand. Now, that kind of goes along with some of these others, the physical appearance, the availability, all that stuff, because a brand's image will cause someone to be brand loyal as well. Okay, so graphs, if you want to graph pricing and such like that, here's a little bit. Your demand and marginal revenue. So all of these really are the same as Monopoly. All right, so all of your curves, demand, marginal revenue, your cost curves, it's all the same as Monopoly. So what was done in the previous is the exact same for these. All right, so that's where the monopolistic competition, that's where some of the Monopoly, its cost curves and its numbers seem to add up that way. So therefore, with that in mind, what about pricing? Well, for pricing, your profit maximizing is still marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So that's where you want to look. You still want to do marginal revenue, marginal cost. You still have to have price greater than average variable cost. Average variable, now remember to stay in business. Now this is just greater than average variable cost. This is just to stay in business. Now certainly you wouldn't, if it's equal to your average variable cost, you wouldn't want to stay in business for very long. You'd have to reevaluate. But now things are different in this type of market because there's always things you can do to try to drum up business. You have more time. In a perfect competition market, not a lot of advertising you can do. You'll see those Apple houses having billboards and things like that. But for the most part, people aren't going to go to one or the other. I mean, maybe they might add on something like, well, we have a petting zoo at this one. If you come here, you can get your apples and your kids can go to the petting zoo, or adults can go. We ain't judging. Things like that. So there's less of that you can do. There's more that, say, for example, Starbucks can do to increase their business and increase their advertising and things like that, rather than an apple orchard. So there's a lot more things you can do here with brand names and things like that. So therefore, you have your pricing model, same as Monopoly. same decision-making process. All right, so the same decision-making process. You do your marginal revenue equals marginal cost, shimmy on up there the demand curve, and there's your price. Same difference there. And then the last one, and I'm going to start it over here because it's a little bit longer. The last one, you'll just have to go with me on that one. There are no barriers to entry because firms earn zero economic profit in the long run. All right, and I will explain that for you. You're all this type of market, there are no barriers to entry, and you will have the firms that they're constantly having new entrants into the market. I mean, look at how many coffee shops spring up all the time to compete with Starbucks. And a fun fact for you, studies have shown that if you want your coffee shop to be a success, your best location is right across the street from a Starbucks. And if you don't believe me, then toddle on down to Marietta Square or downtown Woodstock. Well, downtown Woodstock, no, they don't have the Starbucks there, but they have a very thriving coffee place. But toddle on over to Marietta Square, and look, there's that huge Starbucks that they took an old Crystal and turned it into a Starbucks. And it's really nice, too. I like it. It's one of my favorite in terms of seating for Starbucks. But if you look, Cool Beans, they roast their own beans. They're within a stone's throw of it. You could walk from one to the other without even breaking a sweat, and highly successful. Cool Beans is one of the most highly successful in the area independent coffee shops. So if there is economic profit at first, then new firms come into that market and they capture the demand, some of the economic profit until it's zero. So in the long run, you're not going to get a ton of economic profit. You're just going to get some equilibrium, just a little equilibrium. Economic profit, for those who may not remember or may not know, economic profit is the remember that's the cost of your resources being put to their very best use. All right, so this one is one of my favorites because of the brand loyalty feature. I really enjoy hearing about that, and so that's one of my favorites. All right. Okay, so the next one is, and that went very fast. See, I told you these would go fast. So the next one is, and I think it goes fast because we don't have to go over the pricing strategy or anything like that. We just went over that with Monopoly. If you don't remember it, go back to the previous video lecture, fast forward up to that point where I'm drawing the graphs, and then you can see it again. Or go back to your notes. Let's hope you took some good notes on that one. All right, so oligopoly is the next one. Now that is just a fun one to say. Let's all say it together. Oligopoly. And I'm sorry I didn't get to hear you say it because it's just so fun to say. All right, so oligopoly. This one is closer to monopoly, but with elements of perfect competition. And those elements are really that the actions affect each other. So just like in perfect competition, the actions of each firm affects the other firms, same here. So what you have, this one is a little bit different then. You have a few interdependent firms, a few interdependent sellers, and many buyers. Now, interdependent, that's what I'm talking about. Their actions affect each other. Now, for monopolistic competition, I noticed I forgot to give you any examples except for Starbucks, coffee, and cigarettes, stuff like that. But really, most any product you can think of is in monopolistic competition market, okay? It's one of the least rare or the most common, to put it a different way. Oligopoly is more rare, a little bit, but these two are more common. But monopolistic competition, that's the most common market structure you'll see. So if I were to ask you on an exam, which type of market structure is this? And I'm not, because those are hard questions. So I'm not. But if I were, and you answered monopolistic competition, you would be, you would have an 85% chance of getting it right. All right. So these are a few interdependent sellers and many buyers. And these you can have these big firms that are like that, the few interdependent sellers, and then sometimes they have smaller firms along as part of the market. So there's a lot of gray area on this one. So for example, I like to use the example of domestic American-made automakers, because we have three here. We have Ford, Chrysler, and GM. But there are also some smaller ones, like now Tesla is in the market, and there's a lot of overlap with your foreign automakers. A lot of their products are engineered there, assembled here, different things along those lines. But we'll just stick with the domestic auto industry. Technology is another one. Apple, Microsoft, IBM are some of your main ones. And they're oligopoly. If one makes a decision or one takes some action, it definitely affects the others. All right, so next we have the products are substitute that may be differentiated or homogeneous. So for example, your internet browsers, for example. If your internet browsers, you've got Google. That was another technology. Sorry about that. That one, how did I miss that? Because I use Google Chrome, I'm using it right now. But you have Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Safari, all these different things. And to me, getting on the internet, most part, that's homogenous. You get on there, you're in. There's very little differences among those products. Some of them, autos, on the other hand, can be somewhat differentiated, but they can still substitute for one another. So those are a couple of examples of what I'm talking about right there. There are significant barriers to entry on this one, and we're about to talk about those in just a second. So we'll hang on to that for a minute, put a pin in that for just one hot second. And then changes of any kind affect the others. And an example for that are the auto warranty wars of I guess the 90s would be when that was going. No, it would be the 80s. But anyway, as an advertising campaign, Chrysler decided to, under the head of Lee Iacocca, who I told you about during entrepreneurship, but during that time, Lee Iacocca had started he upped the warranty. Most of them had the same warranty, and he decided to up Chrysler's as a selling tool. And so I think instead of 12 months, 12,000 miles, he went up to 24 months, 24,000 miles. So he gave you an extra year, extra 12,000 miles warranty. Well, people liked that. I mean, what's the biggest thing is you don't want your car to have a huge repair bill. Nobody wants that. So then Ford decides to strike back, or maybe GM went next, I guess, but probably GM went next and did 3 years, 36,000 miles. And then Ford said, well, I'll show y'all, I'll do 4 years, 48,000 miles, and so on and so forth. And it had gotten up to 7 years before somebody said, enough. Now they're never going to buy a new car because we'll just keep fixing the old one. So what they ended up doing then, they called it quits and decided to come to a reasonable agreement. And I think they went back to 2 year, 24 months, 24,000, something like that. But anyway, but one affects the others. It affected their sales, and they had to jump on board. Now let's talk about barriers to entry. The first one are economies of scale. And that's why I said are, because we've got economies of scale. And this one right here relates to the cost structure. And what I mean by that is you have larger firms with established cost structure undercut smaller competitors and sustain a temporary loss. All right, so you've got the cost structure here. I was telling you in the last session about John D. Rockefeller. That's what he did. He's got a larger firm, an established cost structure. He was able to undercut the smaller competitors. And what he would do is, and that's called predatory pricing. And we're going to define that later, so I'm not going to do it right at this time. But you sustain a temporary loss, you undercut the competition, so you're pricing below costs. Now you have this established cost structure, so you can do that. But a smaller firm does not have those resources and cannot, and it would drive them out of business. Then you drive them out of business, and there you go. So that's one of the barriers to entry. Certain industries you have to establish that cost structure, to compete with the big dogs. The auto industry had done that up until Elon Musk kind of was successful at that. But there were others. There was an auto called Tucker, and a movie starring Jeff Bridges was made about that. And then DeLorean, you're all familiar with John DeLorean and his car, especially if you watch Back to the Future. But a lot of that. Now, his car was an engineering nightmare. So if you owned one, you're going to be plagued with repair bills. So, but that notwithstanding, they were and plus DeLorean did some highly questionable stuff. But anyway, discussion for another time. With Tucker especially, the larger firms were able to undercut Tucker's price and cause him to go out of business. So another one is the high cost of entry. That's another barrier, the high cost of entry, and that is the initial investment is too high. So imagine if you're going to enter the auto market and you've got to pay for the factories, the supplies, the technology these days that goes into making them. You have to help out the dealers there. You have to get a dealer network going and things like that. You have to train mechanics to fix them. So plus you have to outlay for the technology. You want to get some technology going in the car to make it valuable to your customers, appealing to your customers. So there's a high cost of entry and not everyone can afford it. And then the last one is called crowding out. And this is when there are so many products offered by a single firm that others are not. Now, an example then might be, well, auto industry is one. You go in there and you're looking around at the different cars and you're like, oh my goodness, I mean, this is too much, too many choices. The beverage industry, for one, there's so many beverages available. I mean, it's a lot. So there's so many products offered by a single firm that there's nowhere to go. You have crowded yourself out of the market. There's no innovation there. There's other firms cannot come into the market because it's not needed. So that's barriers in different ways there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the price structure, about pricing. All right, so once again, your graphs and pricing model are the same as Monopoly. All right, so it's the same thing. Going back there, same pricing structure, which makes it pretty easy there. And your profit maximizing point still marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So you've still got the same profit maximizing point there. The firms are interdependent, meaning one price change affects the others. Now, one price change affects the others. Is this an accident, or is it something we call collusion? Now, sometimes the pricing, okay, in collusion, its common name is called price fixing. And what that is, it's when a group of firms agree to set price at a level to earn economic profit. And they do that. This gives them a higher level of profit. So they're looking and they're saying, you know what, guys, we can, we're looking at this and saying, okay, guys, we can compete with each other. We can go in these prices and we can all lower our prices and try to come out, all that stuff. Or what we can do is we can decide that we're just going to set our price at this level. We're going to earn this amount of modest profit, and we're not going to undercut each other. And then, when you're tired of all that and you're thinking, hey, we could save some money on marketing, we could save some money on all this stuff. So that sounds pretty good. Let's do that. So that's what they do. And when they do this, they form a group called a cartel. And this is a group of firms engaging in collusion. And some of the main ones you might hear of are, obviously you hear about a drug cartel, and that's different. So it's a group of firms with a common goal. Now, clearly they're engaging in collusion, but probably also other things as well. So there's that. So you've got that. And then another one is OPEC, the oil cartel. I've been telling you about OPEC. That's what it is. They're a cartel. They're a group of firms that get together and they engage in collusion. So they all decide they're going to set their price at the same level, and thus earn the same profit that way and stop bidding against each other. Now, that happens here all the time, is what you may be thinking to yourself. Okay, now these things are illegal, by the way. All right, so collusions and cartels, let's write that down. Collusions and cartels are illegal. So how do we get away with it? Well, the two things that I just mentioned, the drug cartel, well, come on, getting arrested, they probably should, because you think about Al Capone, we got him on mail fraud. But they're not so worried about getting arrested for running a cartel. Secondly, is that the ones that I just mentioned are foreign companies, and they don't care about our laws. It may be illegal here. Yeah, that doesn't mean diddly squat. They don't give a pea turkey about it over there. So, the oil cartel and all that stuff, it doesn't matter. Now, you may say to yourself, but this goes on here every day. We see evidence of it. How are they getting away with it? Well, here's how. They call it a price leader. And a price leader, this is a legal form of collusion where a dominant firm sets price and others follow. So a dominant firm. So what would happen in that case, in those markets, a dominant firm emerges and they're the price leader. They set the price and other people have to follow that. Sometimes that pricing is such where they go out of business. Other times, it's just, kind of like they lead and the others follow, like the lead dog in a pack. This is how Walmart does it. Walmart sets their prices and others have to follow. They kind of say they're the lead firm in that industry. But I don't want to talk too much about them because we're going to talk about them more when we get into some other things. All right, so a dominant firm would set the price and the others follow. Now, what are some of the problems with this one? The first problem is they have different average total cost structures. Oh, and this is the problems with collusion and with the price leader, okay? So different average total cost structures. And that's all firms must set their price greater than all right, all firms must set their, let me just write this and then I'll tell you. Okay, so all firms must set their price greater than average total cost where their marginal cost equals 0. Okay, all firms have to set, we just looked at the pricing models just a little while ago. So all firms have to set their price there. Okay, but varying average total costs for different firms mean higher profit for some firms over others. Okay, so for some firms, let's just say, for example, some firms are going to have, there's their average total cost, and they're going to set their price here. And so you can see that they're way above their average total cost. So they're the dominant firm, and this is the price for everyone. But let's say there's some of these other firms that their average total cost might be right here. So perhaps they make a profit, but just barely. All right, so they make a profit, but just barely. And then there's some, let's say theirs look more like that. Or even some that may be way up here. So with that in mind, now those firms aren't going to stay in business, so we'll, more like right down here, but they're going to make different profit, and it may not be enough to satisfy them. They may not like having less profit than the others. They may say, this agreement is not working for me. It's only working for so-and-so, for Walmart over there. It's not working for me at all. Okay, so the second one is the number of member firms. Let's see. Right. A higher number of member firms have a harder time reaching an agreement. For this to work, have to get all the firms in the industry to participate, or at least the majority of them, and the more there are, then it's harder to get them to agree. A lot of reasons being the ones we were just talking about with the cost structures, the same as number one. It's harder to get them agree because some folks will be wanting one price and some people will say, well, no, I need a different price, and so on and so forth. New firms in the market are not obligated. So as new firms enter the market, you've got to get them involved too in the agreement. Otherwise, they can do whatever they want, So new firms they're a wild card there. There's also the temptation to cheat on the agreement by cutting price and capturing more demand. All right. So there's a temptation to cheat. Now, this is going to sound mafia type because you're going to say, okay, well, if I'm, you cheat, and then the people are saying, you're cheating, that's not right. And then the firm that cheats is going to say, yeah, what are you going to do about it? We're doing something illegal anyway. So please turn me in. You're turning yourself in at the same time, right? That's what I would do anyway. And then finally, the last one, brand loyalty. Because there is brand loyalty in an oligopoly market as well, that means that demand is not split evenly. So you're not going to get an equal share of profit of market for everyone. We already knew profit was not going to be equal because of the cost structures, but we also know now that brand loyalty means, the demand's not going to be split evenly. All right, Coke and Pepsi know that one. So do Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors. All right, so now we're going to talk about game theory and wrap it up with that. It won't take long. Promise. Of course, it doesn't matter to you because on this type, you can always just push pause and come back. So I guess I shouldn't waste my time apologizing, right? Okay, so game theory is a tool for analyzing the behavior and pricing strategies of interdependent oligopoly firms. Right? So it's a tool for analyzing behavior pricing strategies of interdependent oligopoly firms. If you have seen the movie Crazy Rich Asians, the main character in there, the professor, this is what she teaches economics, and this is part of what, I mean, he even references she teaches game theory. So she's teaching, she says she famously beats one of her students at a card game and said, he's playing to win, I'm playing not to lose, and there is a difference in that. And if you think about it, it'll come to you. But that does work with this, okay? Game theory, a tool for analyzing behavior and pricing strategies. What you're saying with game theory is you're asking, how would my competitor respond if I did this? Okay, that's what you're asking. How would my competitor respond if I did this? And the answer is the same way I'd respond. It's so simple. This is what I love about economics, folks, and you hear me clapping in the background because this is what I love about it. It is so simple and such common sense. People spend so much time. Now, they should have just taken economics and they would get this, but they spend so much time in business trying to figure out, how is my competitor going to respond to this? What if I do this, then what are they going to do? Do the same thing you would do. It's a common sense. It's in legal terms, in the law, it's called the reasonable man standard. Same thing here. The reasonable man standard, the reasonable person standard. They would respond the same way you'd respond. All right? And we're all normal enough to answer that question. So even if you say, well, I'm weird, so nobody thinks like me. Yeah, they do. They all do. We're all weird. We all think differently. So how would your competitor respond? The same exact way you would. Okay. This theory of study, there was a Nobel Prize given for this development of this field of study. His name is John Nash, was the winner, and there's a movie based on that too. It's called A Beautiful Mind, and it stars Russell Crowe. And if I'm not mistaken, he won an Oscar for that. But it's called the Nash Equilibrium. All right, named after him. And this is where you map out a best outcome under a set of conditions. So for the Nash equilibrium, you take your information and you map out a best outcome under a set of conditions. So we're going to look at one that's most commonly used in class, and I like to use it because it's fun. And it's called the prisoner's dilemma. All right, the prisoner's dilemma. All right, so what it is, you have a payoff matrix, and it shows the number of years of prison time for two corrupt bankers, and their names are A and B. Okay? So their names are A and B. And so we're not going to draw the matrix because that's fun, but it's easier to, well, we're just going to, in the entrance of time, we're just going to look at this. Okay, so you show the number of years of prison time for two corrupt bankers, A and B, and they've got a choice to make. All right, so let's look at this. So number one, if both confess, they each get 2 years. All right, if both confess, they each get 2 years. 2. If neither confess, they each get 1 year for a previous minor transgression, right? 3. If A confesses while B does not, A gets no prison time. Well, let's just say A goes free, while B gets 8 years. Wow, they knocked that one up, didn't they? All right, and then if B confesses while A does not, B goes free while A gets 8 years. All right, so okay, so there it is. So let's look at A. So if you were A, if I were A, I would be thinking like this, okay? If I were prisoner A, if I were banker A, my strategic thinking, I'd be thinking, what in the world am I going to do? And here's what I would think. Number one, I don't know what B is going to do, right? You don't know what they're going to do. Now, you may think you know, and I know we've all seen the movies where that person's sitting there, know that other person did not confess, but you don't really know. So you can think, it does not know what B will do, and you can think, if B and I don't confess, we get 1 year instead of 2. And then 2 is if both confess. Okay. So if B and I don't, if they both don't confess, they get 1 year instead of 2. If they both confess, they're going to get 2. All right. But if B does and I do not, I get 8 years. Right? And then if both confess, both get 2 years. Okay, so for A, not confess. All right, so let's look at what's going on. So if A does not confess, so if A confesses, all right, so if A confesses, A is either going to get so if A confesses, then he'll either get no time or 2 years. If he doesn't confess, then it depends. He'll either get 1 year or 8 years. Now, the 8 years is a big deterrent there. So the best strategy for A, looking at that, is to confess. irrespective of what B does. Because if A confesses, all right, so if A confesses and then B does also, then A gets 2 years. All right, so if A and B both confess, they get 2 years. If B does not, then A's confessed and they get to go home with no jail time. Those are the best odds because they have no way of knowing what B's course of action. All right, so the winner's kind of off the table because that would mean that because the risk of only getting 1 year by not confessing is also to get 8 years. But if you confess, then you're either going to get 2 years or nothing. That sounds like your best odds, definitely. Thus, A confesses. All right. So, I put it down for you. All right, so best odds are for A to confess since it has the less risk of major jail time, and these actions are unknown. All right, now here's something else. Let's look at it this way. B, on the other hand, now B is a person too, so you can apply that same logic to B, right? So if you apply that same logic to B, all right, all you'd have to do is change every A to B and every B to A right here. Then B is going to do the same thing, aren't they? So apply the same logic to B, who will also confess. They each get they each get 2 years. That's the logic involved with game theory, because you have to say your competitor is going to do the same thing you would do, therefore you can expect B to confess as well. That's still the best thing. Now, if they could have talked ahead of time and said neither one of them confessed, they're still going to get a year, but the likelihood there would be, now if both actions are known, the likelihood there would be for one to confess and write out the other one. Which again, doing that, they will both confess, and if one's going to rat out the other one, then it makes sense to think the other one would rat out that one as well, so they still end up in the same place, both confessing, both getting 2 years. Now this is called the dominant strategy. All right. This was called the dominant strategy or the Nash equilibrium in game theory. So the dominant strategy, the Nash equilibrium, is the best outcome irrespective of what my opponent does. All right, so all that is called the Nash equilibrium, and it means that regardless of what your opponent does, you figure out what's the best strategy for you. Assume, here we go, all right, so what you would do, you figure out the best strategy for you, and you assume your opponent is doing the same thing, and that is the Nash equilibrium. And you can do that if you are poker players, and I'm not trying to get you to be no, so do not blame me if you go to Las Vegas and lose your shirts. It is not my fault, but that is what you're doing. You're trying to figure out what is your opponent doing, what action would they take. They would take the same thing. They're playing to win. So what's best for you, you're going to figure out what's best for you. Your opponent's going to figure out what's best for them. If you want to predict your opponent's actions, what you need to do is put yourself in their shoes and figure out what is best for them. That's how you figure out what your opponent is doing. That's the best strategy for business, and that is how to succeed in business without really trying. No, technically that's not the plot of the movie, but that is what you do. You just figure out, put yourself in the other person's shoes and think, what would I do if I were them? That's a great parenting strategy. That's a great friendship strategy. That's just a great strategy. So game theory can be applied to many things other than economics. Aren't you glad you took this class? You were learning life skills, people. There's your life for the day. You thought you weren't going to have one, but I slipped it right in there on you. All right, so that is that for market strategies, or market structures rather. Sort of. We've got a little bit left to finish up, and that is on regulation, which will be the next one. That one will be a very short one. It doesn't take long to go through regulation, so we'll go through that. We've got regulation, we've got government spending, and then international, and we'll be done. So I will see you next time. I hope you are having fun with this. I hope you enjoyed this. It's definitely one of my favorite things to talk about, and have a great rest of your day.